We live in a world that has confused movement with progress, where long hours are worn like medals and back-to-back meetings are seen as signs of importance. It's as if we've built an entire culture that equates being busy with being valuable. But the truth is, being busy is not a badge of honor. It's often a mask, hiding the fact that we're not actually doing what matters. Have you ever finished a day exhausted, your calendar a blur of calls and tasks, and yet felt like you didn't really accomplish anything meaningful? You were busy. Maybe you were even praised for how much you were juggling, but deep down you knew you weren't moving the needle. That gnawing feeling isn't failure. It's your intuition trying to tell you something. It's trying to remind you that being in motion doesn't mean you're headed somewhere that matters. We've created a culture that celebrates activity over intention. We fill our days with to-do lists, check boxes, and a constant stream of pings and notifications that demand our attention. But when was the last time you stopped to ask, what is all of this for? If we're not careful, busyness becomes a drug. It keeps us distracted from harder, more important questions. It gives us a sense of control, a sense of importance, but that comfort is often an illusion. There's a difference between being busy and being productive. It's the difference between spinning a hamster wheel and actually getting somewhere. Productivity is intentional, it's focused, it's aligned with purpose. It's the result of knowing what matters and giving your best energy to that, not just what's next or what's loudest. Let's take a step back. Why do we glorify busy in the first place? In many ways, it's fear. Fear of being left behind, fear of being seen as lazy, fear of not being needed. So we fill our schedules, reply instantly to emails, and say yes to things we don't believe in just to stay in motion. We convince ourselves that doing more means we're contributing more. But productivity isn't about volume, it's about impact. It's about whether what you did today actually got you closer to something that matters. And here's the paradox. The people who make the greatest impact are often the least busy. Not because they're doing nothing, but because they've gotten really good at saying no to the wrong things. They've traded being everywhere for being effective somewhere. They've learned that focus is not a limitation, it's a superpower. Think about the most influential leaders, creators, or change makers you admire. They're not racing from task to task. They're not multitasking their way through 12-hour days. They're deeply present, intentional, thoughtful. They protect their time like it's gold because they know it is. They don't measure their worth by how packed their calendars are. They measure it by what changes because they showed up. But shifting from busy to productive isn't easy. It requires courage. The courage to slow down. The courage to challenge expectations, the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. It requires you to stop hiding behind activity and start standing in clarity. And that clarity only comes when you stop long enough to ask yourself, am I spending my time on the things that actually matter, or am I just trying to look like I am? It's a tough mirror to look into, because many of us are very good at being busy. We're excellent at reacting, responding, filling gaps. But being productive, truly productive, requires us to rise above the noise and ask, is this the best use of me? This isn't about working less, it's about working better. It's about aligning your energy with your values. Because when we work from a place of alignment, we don't just get more done, we create more meaning. We feel more connected, more fulfilled, more alive. I once spoke with a CEO who said, I used to think my job was to be in every meeting, to answer every email within the hour. I felt like I had to be everywhere. But when I stepped back, I realized I wasn't leading, I was just reacting. I was busy, but I wasn't building anything. That realization changed everything for him. He began delegating more, saying no more. He created space to think, to imagine, to lead. His company didn't slow down. It sped up because his presence began to matter more than his availability. This is the shift we all need to make. From being present everywhere to being purposeful somewhere. From constant motion to meaningful direction. Because when we stop wearing busy like a badge, we start reclaiming our time for what it was always meant to be. A tool. Not a trap. Time is the one resource we never get back. We can't earn more of it, we can't buy it. We can only choose how to spend it. So the question isn't whether you're busy, The real question is, are you busy doing the wrong things? Are you filling your days with distractions because it's easier than facing the discomfort of real purpose? Productivity starts with awareness. It starts with the courage to pause, to reflect, to choose. And when we make that choice, when we decide to stop celebrating busyness and start prioritizing impact, we unlock something powerful. We begin to live and work from a place of intentionality. And that's where real progress begins. Because being busy is not the goal. Being effective is. Busyness might make you look important, but only impact makes you truly valuable. And in the end, it's not how much you did, it's whether what you did made a difference. There's a simple but powerful question we often forget to ask. Why am I doing this? Not in a cynical way, not in frustration, but in honest curiosity. Why this meeting? Why this task? Why this goal? We've been taught to jump into action, to measure our success by how much we do, how quickly we do it, how efficiently we move from one thing to the next. But when we lose sight of why we're doing it in the first place, we begin to drift. And drifting looks a lot like working hard. It looks like commitment. It looks like discipline. But it's motion without meaning. Purpose gives work its power, gives effort its direction. Without purpose, we run fast in circles. We mistake speed for significance. We check boxes without ever stopping to consider if those boxes were worth checking in the first place. Activity without purpose is like climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. You might reach the top, but it won't take you where you want to go. So many people I meet are exhausted, not because they're doing too much, but because they're doing too much of what doesn't matter. They've become experts at doing professionals at staying busy, but they're unsure whether their effort is connected to something meaningful. And that's the silent weight we carry. Not the weight of work, but the weight of misalignment. The weight of waking up each day and wondering if what we do truly matters or if we've just gotten really good at staying occupied. The most important question any person or organization can ask isn't, what should we do next? It's, why does this matter? The most successful people don't start with a plan, they start with a purpose. They don't start with a task list, they start with a cause. They're not just chasing goals, they're chasing meaning. And that's the difference between those who burn out and those who ignite others. Because purpose is fuel, it turns effort into impact. It gives every task, even the hard, unglamorous ones, a sense of contribution. When we're clear on our why, even small steps feel significant. Without it, even our best days feel empty. I've sat with leaders who've built enormous companies only to find themselves asking, why don't I feel fulfilled? And I've seen people with modest resources but deep conviction create movements that shift culture. The difference isn't in their tools, it's in their why. Purpose is the great multiplier. It turns average ideas into world-changing ones and ordinary people into extraordinary leaders. But here's the catch. Finding your why takes intention. It takes space. It's not something that shows up in the middle of a dozen meetings or buried under 100 unread emails. It requires stillness, reflection, the willingness to step back and ask, is this work connected to something bigger than me? Is this goal just about checking a box, or is it part of something meaningful? That's the shift we need to make. We need to stop starting with what we do and start with why we do it. Because when we start with why, everything changes. Clarity becomes a compass. Priorities become obvious. We stop wasting time on things that look good on paper but don't move us forward in life. And suddenly productivity becomes effortless, not because we're doing more, but because we're doing what matters most. When we lead with purpose, we become less reactive and more intentional. We stop letting the loudest thing in the room dictate our next move. Instead, we let meaning guide our action. We move from distraction to direction. And that's where real productivity begins, not with efficiency, but with alignment. I remember talking to a young woman who worked in a high-pressure job in a well-known company. Her days were full. Her performance reviews were glowing. From the outside, she was thriving. But inside, she felt disconnected. I don't know why I'm doing this, she told me. It all looks good, but it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like me. That sentence stuck with me because it's the story of so many people successful on the surface, but quietly wondering if they're climbing the wrong mountain. We often wait too long to ask the deeper questions. We tell ourselves we'll reflect once we reach the next milestone. But the milestones keep moving. The work keeps coming. And before we know it, years go by filled with action, but missing direction. We don't need to wait until we hit a wall to get clear on our why. We can choose to pause now. We can choose to ask the questions now, because the earlier we connect with our purpose, the more intentional our path becomes. And it's not just about personal fulfillment, it's about effectiveness. Teams that know their purpose outperform teams that don't. Leaders who communicate why they do what they do inspire deeper loyalty than those who just push tasks. People will rally around a cause, they'll give their best, not for a paycheck, but for a purpose that resonates. Purpose isn't a luxury. It's not something nice to have when we have time. It's the foundation of everything. And when we build our work and our lives on that foundation, we stop chasing productivity as an outcome. Instead, it becomes a natural result of clarity and commitment. It becomes a byproduct of doing the right things for the right reasons. So the next time you're overwhelmed with tasks, before you dive in, take a breath. Ask yourself the simplest, hardest question: why am I doing this? And if the answer isn't clear, give yourself permission to step back, to rethink, to realign. Because clarity doesn't slow you down, it speeds you up in the right direction. When we lead with why, we don't just get more done, we get the right things done. And that's what true productivity is about. Not volume, not speed, but purpose. Because when our actions are grounded in why, we stop spinning, we start building. And that's when our work and our lives begin to mean something more. So there's a moment in every day where you're faced with a choice. You might not even realize it's happening. It's quiet, it doesn't come with an alarm, but there it is. The choice between what is urgent and what is important. Urgency demands your attention. It's loud, it flashes, it pings, it pressures, and because it's right in front of you, it feels like the most responsible thing to do. That email that just landed, that request marked ACE, that unexpected meeting invite, they feel like emergencies. But not everything that's urgent is important. And not everything important ever shows up marked as urgent. And this is one of the traps we fall into. We become responders instead of leaders. We become managers of chaos instead of stewards of purpose. We spend so much of our time reacting, putting out fires, replying to messages, clearing our inbox, that we leave no time to create anything meaningful. We trade significance for speed. We move fast but not forward. And it's not because we're lazy. It's not because we don't care. In fact, it's the opposite. We care so much that we don't want to disappoint anyone. So we say yes to everything that comes flying our way. But in doing that, we start neglecting the deeper work, the strategic, thoughtful, creative, long-term work, because we're too busy handling whatever popped up 5 minutes ago. Here's the hard truth. Urgent work is seductive. It gives us an immediate sense of accomplishment. We respond, we check a box, we feel useful. But if we're not careful, we can spend years being useful without ever being impactful. We wake up one day and realize we've been climbing a ladder that someone else built, only to find it leaning against a wall we never intended to reach. The people who make the greatest difference in companies, in communities, in their own lives, have learned to resist that pull. They've learned to distinguish between the impulse to respond and the discipline to reflect. They choose what's important even when it's quiet, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't come with a deadline. And that's what makes the difference. There's a story I heard once that stayed with me. A man is walking through the woods with a dull saw, trying to cut through a thick tree. He's working hard, sweating, exhausted. Someone walks by and says, "Why don't you stop and sharpen your saw?" The man replies, "I can't stop. I'm too busy sawing." That's how many of us live. Too busy to get better. Too busy to think. Too busy to be effective. Because sharpening the saw, reflecting, planning, prioritizing doesn't feel urgent, but it's the very thing that makes the work easier, faster, and more impactful in the long run. We don't need to be busier, we need to be braver. Braver to say no to urgency that isn't aligned with what truly matters. Braver to protect time for thinking, learning, and creating. Braver to step back when everything around us is demanding we step in. Because here's the thing. The world will never stop asking for your attention. There will always be more to do, more people to please, more tasks to check off, but only you can decide what matters most. Only you can defend your time from being consumed by everything that feels urgent but adds nothing to your future. And this isn't just about personal productivity, it's about leadership. Leaders who prioritize the important over the urgent build things that last. They don't just react to what's happening now, they shape what's going to happen next. They don't let today's noise drown out tomorrow's vision. They carve out time to listen, to question, to plan, because they know that impact takes time. It doesn't show up in the middle of a crisis. It grows in the margins we protect for meaningful work. But that's hard to do when we're constantly on edge, constantly checking, constantly responding. So we have to become intentional. We have to design our time, not just fill it. That means creating space for deep work, for strategic thinking, for work that moves the needle, not just the work that moves the clock. It means asking different questions. Instead of what's next, try what matters most. Instead of what's urgent, try what's meaningful. Because once you start asking better questions, you begin making better choices. So I've seen this play out in real teams and real organizations. The teams that thrive aren't the ones that respond the fastest. They're the ones that think the clearest. They're not obsessed with staying busy. They're focused on staying aligned. They understand that saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else. So they choose carefully. They protect their energy. They value depth over speed. And that focus creates trust, clarity, and results. And you know what else? They don't feel burnt out all the time. Because burnout isn't just the result of doing too much. It's often the result of doing too much that doesn't matter. When we spend our days putting out fires instead of building something we believe in, it drains us. Not just our time, but our spirit. It disconnects us from meaning. And when we lose that connection, even our wins start to feel hollow. But when we flip the script, when we put the important before the urgent, everything changes. We feel more grounded, more focused, more alive, because we're not just surviving the day, we're shaping the future. And that's a much better way to work and a much better way to live. So the next time something shows up marked urgent, take a breath, ask yourself, is it urgent for them or important for me? Is this reaction helping me create what I care about or just keeping me busy for one more hour? Urgency wants your attention, importance wants your intention. Choose wisely. Because your time is limited. Your energy is sacred. And your life, your actual life, is made up of how you answer that question every day. We live in a world that rewards visibility more than value. We answer emails quickly, attend every meeting, check off task after task, and then walk away with a sense of progress. But often we confuse being connected with being effective. And the hard truth is, distraction is no longer just something that pulls us away from our work. It masquerades as work itself. Think about how many times you've sat down to do something meaningful, a presentation, a strategy, a new idea, only to get derailed within minutes. A notification, a message, a Slack ping, a calendar invite. Suddenly you're in a meeting you didn't ask for, responding to someone else's urgency, and whatever meaningful work you were meant to do is buried under a pile of micro-demands. We convince ourselves that staying on top of things is productive, that being available, being responsive, being in the loop, that's where the value is. But that's not true. That's just noise wearing a suit. That's motion dressed up as progress. And it's dangerous because it gives us the illusion of productivity while slowly starving the deep work that actually creates impact. Deep work. The kind that moves ideas forward, solves hard problems, creates something lasting. Doesn't happen between meetings. It doesn't happen while you're scanning your inbox or catching up on chats. It happens in silence, in space, in long stretches of uninterrupted thought. And yet, we've created work cultures where that kind of space is seen as a luxury, or worse, a sign that someone isn't busy enough. There's a false heroism in being always available. We reward people who respond at lightning speed. We praise the ones who never seem to stop moving. But real work isn't about speed, it's about depth. And depth requires distance from distraction. One of the most common myths in modern work is that multitasking makes us efficient. But science and experience tells a different story. Every time we switch from one task to another, even briefly, we lose focus, we dilute our attention. And over time, we become addicted to the rush of doing many things instead of the satisfaction of doing the right thing. Some people wear their multitasking as a badge of honor, but let's be honest, multitasking doesn't mean you're getting more done, it means you're doing more things poorly. It means you're spreading your energy so thin that nothing gets your full presence. And without presence, there is no depth. Without depth, there is no real contribution. He said distraction is subtle. It doesn't always look like scrolling on your phone or watching videos when you should be working. Sometimes it looks like responding to emails. Sometimes it looks like attending yet another meeting. Sometimes it looks like tweaking a presentation deck for the 10th time. In other words, sometimes distraction disguises itself as diligence. It's not wasting time, it's wasting purpose. And the cost is high. Because every time we surrender to distraction, even the noble kind, we take time away from something bigger. The email you answered immediately, maybe it could have waited. The meeting you accepted without question, maybe it didn't need you. But the idea you were trying to develop, the solution you were building, the person you were mentoring, that was your contribution. And that got pushed aside because something else made more noise. I once spoke with a founder of a fast-growing startup. He was overwhelmed, frustrated. I'm in meetings all day, he said, and yet I feel like nothing's moving forward. So I asked him a simple question. How much time do you block for thinking? He looked confused. Thinking, he asked. I don't have time to think. And that right there was the problem. Thinking, planning, reflecting, creating isn't a luxury. It's a leadership responsibility. But in a distracted world, even thinking feels indulgent. We need to reclaim our time from the tyranny of distraction. Not because email is bad, not because meetings are evil, but because when we let those things dominate our attention, we lose sight of what actually matters. We become reactive instead of proactive. We become performers of productivity instead of practitioners of purpose. This is about setting boundaries, about being ruthless with our calendars and intentional with our attention, about giving ourselves and our teams permission to disconnect from the noise so we can reconnect to the work that matters. It's not easy. It takes courage. Courage to log off, courage to say no, courage to protect time that no one else will protect for you. Because here's the truth, no one will guard your focus for you. The world is happy to steal your attention and fill it with things that look like work but drain your energy. And if we're not careful, we'll spend our best hours on other people's priorities while our own purpose collects dust in the corner. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can choose differently. We can choose to prioritize presence over performance. We can build cultures where focus is respected, where thinking is valued, where deep work is protected like gold. And in doing so, we unlock our greatest potential, not by doing more, but by doing what matters with more clarity, more heart, and more intention. So the next time you find yourself reaching for your phone out of habit or saying yes to a meeting you know won't serve you, pause, ask yourself, is this work or is this just noise? Is this task moving me closer to what matters or just keeping me comfortably distracted? Because not everything that looks like work is work. Not everything that feels productive creates value. And not everything that asks for your attention deserves it. In a world full of noise, the most powerful thing you can do is listen to what's quiet. The still, steady voice of purpose underneath the distractions. That's where the real work is waiting. And that's where you'll find your greatest contribution. When people hear the word discipline, most imagine structure, routines, to-do lists, schedules packed from morning to night. Discipline, we're told, is about doing more, being tougher, grinding harder. But real discipline, the kind that leads to progress, to growth, to fulfillment, is not about doing more things. It's about doing the right things. And that's a much harder kind of discipline, because the truth is anyone can be busy, It doesn't take discipline to say yes to every request, to fill your calendar with calls, to constantly be on the move. That's not discipline, that's default. That's what happens when we don't stop to think. Real discipline is knowing what to say no to. It's knowing what not to pursue. It's standing firm in the face of endless distractions and saying, this is what matters, and I'm willing to let go of everything else. We tend to admire people who seem to do it all, the high achievers, the go-getters, the multitaskers. But the people who truly make a difference aren't doing everything, they're doing less, with more focus, more intention, more heart. They've made peace with not pleasing everyone. They've accepted that success requires sacrifice, not of their health or values, but of the non-essential. They've chosen depth over breadth. That's discipline. And it's not glamorous, it's not loud, it's not something you can always post about or measure in metrics. Sometimes discipline looks like turning down an exciting opportunity because it's not aligned with your purpose. Sometimes it looks like walking away from what's good so you can protect what's great. Sometimes it's sitting in silence when everyone else is chasing noise. Discipline is quiet, but it's powerful. One of the most misunderstood aspects of discipline is that it's about self-denial, that it's a restriction, a punishment. But that's not true. Real discipline is an act of liberation. It frees us from the trap of being everything to everyone. It frees us from the endless loop of chasing validation through busyness. It allows us to focus, and in that focus we find clarity, we find meaning. I once sat with a leader whose calendar looked like a battlefield, back-to-back meetings, no time to breathe, no space to think. This is just the way it is, he said. This is what it takes to be successful. But when we stepped back and looked at the bigger picture, something became clear. Half the meetings weren't necessary. Many of the tasks could have been delegated, and some of the biggest priorities were consistently being pushed aside for later, a later that never came. So I asked him, what's the most important thing you haven't done in weeks? He thought about it. Then he said quietly, I haven't spent time with my team. Not real time. Not the kind where we talk about the mission, the culture, the why behind our work. And that was the problem. He was doing everything except what mattered most. That's the danger of confusing activity with impact. When we don't make space for discipline, our work starts to serve the system instead of the mission. We keep up appearances. We stay in motion, but we drift slowly, quietly away from what we actually set out to do. Discipline brings us back. It forces us to choose, and choice is hard because saying yes is easy. It feels generous. It feels ambitious, but saying yes to everything is just another way of avoiding the discomfort of choosing, of committing, of standing for something. When you're disciplined, you start every day with intention, not just a to-do list, but a why-do list. You decide in advance what matters most, and then you protect it ruthlessly. Not because you're inflexible, but because you're invested. Not because you don't care, but because you care deeply about the mission, about the outcome, about doing work that has meaning. Discipline says, I'm not here to be reactive, I'm here to be responsible for my time, my focus, and my energy. It allows you to slow down so you can speed up in the right direction. It lets you zoom out and say, this path, it's not for me. This opportunity doesn't align. This task, someone else can do it better. But it takes practice. Because everything around us pulls us in the opposite direction. Notifications, expectations, obligations, all of it urges us to keep moving. Faster, louder, busier. We're praised for availability, not presence, for volume, not value. That's why discipline must be intentional. It doesn't happen on accident. It's a commitment we make to ourselves, to our teams, to our purpose. It's the decision to stop measuring our worth by how much we get done and start measuring it by what we get done and how deeply it aligns with what we believe. Discipline doesn't mean working harder. It means working more truthfully. It means saying, I will not let urgency override importance. I will not let popularity override purpose. I will not let busy override better. And that's not something you do once. It's something you return to every day. a reset, a recalibration, a reminder. I'm not here to do everything. I'm here to do what matters. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, not because you're lazy, but because you care too much and want to do it all, pause. Look at your commitments. Look at your calendar. Ask yourself, is this the life I want to build? Is this the work I want to be remembered for? Am I doing what matters most or just what's most convenient? Because discipline isn't about denying yourself. It's about devoting yourself to what's essential, to what's meaningful, to what lasts. That's where true productivity lives. Not in the number of things you finish, but in the importance of the things you start and the courage to see them through.